Welcome to The Explainer, where we're digging into the ancient and, let's be honest, pretty mysterious world of numerology.
So let's just jump right in with a big question. What if your name isn't just a label? What if it's actually a hidden code? And what if the numbers in your birthday hold the key to who you are and where you're going? Well, that's the whole idea behind numerology. It's this ancient belief that the universe and our place in it can be understood through the mystical power of numbers. Now, if you look into numerology today, you'll find it's mostly dominated by two major systems, and they each offer a slightly different way of looking at things. You've got the Chaldean system, which is supposed to reveal your destiny, the external forces shaping your life. And then there's the Pythagorean system, which is more about your inner potential and what you can become.
So, how in the world do you actually turn a name into a number? Let's get into it and break down the code.
Okay, first up is the Chaldean chart. This one has its roots in ancient Babylon. The key thing here is that letters get assigned numbers from 1 to 8 based on their sound vibration, not just alphabetical order. And you might have noticed something's missing. Where's the number 9? Well, in this system, 9 is considered sacred, so it's kind of kept separate from everything else. The Pythagorean system, on the other hand, is way more straightforward. It's attributed to the famous Greek philosopher, and it just maps letters to numbers 1 through 9, right in order. A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, you get the idea. Once you hit 9, you just loop right back to 1. Simple.
All right, let's see this in action. We'll use the name Rajneesh Karn. If you use the Chaldean chart, the numbers add up to 37, and you keep reducing it down until you get a single digit, which is 1. But if you use the Pythagorean chart for that exact same name, it adds up to 52, which reduces all the way down to 7. See? It just goes to show how the system you pick can totally change the outcome.
But here's the thing. This idea that numbers hold some kind of secret meaning, this is not some new age fad. Nope, this is a fascination that goes back thousands of years and stretches all across the globe.
I mean, think about it. You had the Babylonians linking numbers to the stars way back around 600 BCE. And then you have the Mayans who developed this incredibly complex 819-day calendar just to track the planets. So many cultures all over the world have believed for a very long time that numbers are somehow fundamental to how the cosmos works.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures that mindset. It's from a heading on the ancient Egyptian Rhine papyrus from around 1800 BCE. It promises rules for inquiring into nature and for knowing all that exists, every mystery, every secret. For them, math wasn't just for adding things up, it was literally the key to unlocking the entire universe.
In fact, you can tell their entire creation story just using numbers. It all starts with the 1, a being named Atum. From that 1 comes 2, the female principle, Isis. From 2 comes 3, the male principle, Osiris. And their union, it produces 5, the child, Horus. What's wild is that this creates a summation series, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, a mathematical pattern that they saw repeated all over the place in nature.
And this deep respect for certain numbers isn't just an Egyptian thing. It's a common thread you can find woven through so many of the world's biggest religions.
Let's start with a really famous one, the number 7.
It pops up constantly as a symbol of completeness or perfection. In Judaism and Christianity, you see it everywhere. 7 days of creation, 7 branches on the menorah, the 7 seals in the book of Revelation. It's this powerful symbol of divine order and finishing a cycle.
Then, of course, there's the number 12.
This one is often tied to cosmic structure. I mean, it reflects the 12 lunar months in a year, right? But it's also about spiritual totality. You have the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples of Jesus. It's a number that just screams divine authority and organization.
Now, if we head east, we find another number that's seen as representing the wholeness of existence, 108.
In Hinduism, 108 is so sacred that prayer beads, or malas, come in strings of 108. What's really fascinating is that Vedic mathematicians saw it as a number that actually connects the sun, the moon, and the earth, a symbol of true cosmic unity.
Now, whenever you talk about numerology in the Western world, there's one name that always comes up, Pythagoras. But the real history there is a lot messier than the popular myth would have you believe.
Modern scholars like Andrew Gregory from UCL have painted a very different picture. It's not of a master mathematician, but of a spiritual leader, maybe even a kind of shaman, who is obsessed with what happens to the soul after you die.
The truth is, the historical Pythagoras never wrote a single thing down.
His main focus was on reincarnation and starting this religious sect with really strict rules, including, and this is true, a ban on eating beans. And get this, even his contemporaries like Plato and Aristotle never gave him credit for proving his famous theorem. He was much more of a spiritual guru than a scientist.
So that brings us to the elephant in the room. What does modern science have to say about all this? Is there any hard evidence to back up any of numerology's claims?
Well, a 2017 study tried to find out. Researchers took over 800 Nobel Prize winners. We're talking people at the absolute pinnacle of their fields, and calculated their birth numbers. And the result? The distribution of their numbers was no different than what you'd expect from pure random chance. There was no special pattern at all.
Okay, so if it's not backed by science, why does it feel so true to so many people? Well, psychology has a pretty good answer. A lot of it comes down to things called Barnum statements. These are really vague descriptions, like you have a great need for other people to like and admire you. Well, who doesn't, right? And then you have confirmation bias, which is our brain's natural habit of remembering all the times a prediction seemed right and conveniently forgetting all the times it was totally wrong.
And that really brings us to the heart of it all. Are numbers a secret language of the universe? A cosmic code that's just waiting for us to crack it? Or is this ancient, ongoing fascination with them really just a mirror, reflecting our own deep, very human search for meaning in what can feel like a really chaotic world? That's the big question to think about.
Have you ever tried to read the book of Genesis and just hit a wall? You get to these parts about people's ages and it's just mind-boggling. Methuselah lived to be 969 years old, Adam lived to 930. It's one of the first and biggest hurdles for anyone trying to take the text seriously. Well, let's dive into this because the real explanation is way more fascinating than you might think.
And this right here is the heart of the problem. Theologian Hugh Ross absolutely nails it. These numbers just feel so completely impossible that for a lot of people, they make the entire book seem like a fairy tale. For centuries, this has been a major, major stumbling block for readers and scholars.
So, that brings us right to the big question we're tackling. Is it even possible? I mean, did our ancient ancestors have some kind of biological secret to long life that we've totally lost? Or is something else going on here entirely, something we're just not seeing? To get to the bottom of this, we first have to check out the usual explanations people have come up with over the years. And spoiler alert, as we're about to see, most of them don't really hold up.
Okay, so people have tried to make sense of this in a few ways. There's the year-month theory, that maybe a year just meant a month. Sounds good until you do the math and realize that makes some of these guys fathers at age 5. Yeah, not likely. Then you've got astronomical theories, supernovas, a different Earth rotation, or the famous canopy theory, a protective vapor layer around the Earth. Cool ideas, but there is zero physical evidence to back any of them up. And the idea that the ages refer to a whole dynasty instead of one person? That just doesn't fit with very personal stories, you know? Like Noah and his sons building the ark.
So, if biology, astronomy, and all these other theories fall flat, where do we look? Well, here's the twist. The clue isn't in the physical world at all. It's in the world of numbers, and more specifically, how people in the ancient world thought about numbers.
To crack this code, we have to go back to the source. We've got to take a little trip back in time to the cradle of civilization itself, Mesopotamia.
We're talking about the region of modern-day Iraq over 5,000 years ago. And you got to get any idea of primitive people out of your head. These people were brilliant innovators, and they recorded all their incredible knowledge on these clay tablets using a script called cuneiform.
And you have to understand just how advanced they were. I mean, these are the people who gave us the wheel, the first writing system, the very foundations of astronomy. They were mathematical geniuses. They were doing algebra and geometry. And get this, they knew the Pythagorean theorem a full 1,000 years before Pythagoras was even born. These are the minds that shaped the entire intellectual world of the Old Testament.
So the crucial piece of the puzzle is their number system. We use a base 10 system, based on tens, probably because we have 10 fingers. But the Sumerians and Babylonians, they used a sexagesimal or base 60 system. And this choice wasn't random, it was pure genius. The number 60 is divisible by a whole bunch of smaller numbers, which makes calculations, especially with fractions, incredibly clean and simple.
Okay, so understanding their base 60 system is step 1. But the real key, the big aha moment, is realizing that for them, numbers weren't just about counting.
This is the concept that changes absolutely everything. In their worldview, a single number could have a literal value, but it could also carry a second, much deeper, symbolic meaning.
So they basically operated with two kinds of values. On one hand, you've got the numerical value, the practical number you'd use for counting your sheep or paying taxes, but on the other hand, you have the numerological value, a sacred meaning that was used in religious texts to show a spiritual truth or to honor a god. In fact, the head of their pantheon, the god Anu, was assigned the number 60, the most perfect number in their system. And as researcher Carol A. Hill puts it, when we read an ancient religious text like Genesis, we need to consider that the numbers might not just be data points, they could be symbols.
So the theory is that these incredible lifespans weren't meant to be read as literal biological ages. They were a kind of code, a way of saying that these figures, Adam, Noah, Methuselah, were profoundly important, righteous, and in harmony with the cosmos, all expressed through a sacred mathematical language.
And we can see this exact principle in action with one number in particular, a number that held a really unique power in the ancient world, 7.
To understand why 7 was so special, you have to see just how elegant their base 60 system really was. Just look at this. When you calculate the reciprocal of numbers like 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 in base 60, you get these beautiful, simple, finite answers. It's a mathematically harmonious and predictable system.
It all worked perfectly. The whole system was orderly, predictable, and just clean. That is, until they tried to divide by 7. And this is what they got. A total mess. Unlike the neat, tidy results from all the numbers before it, the reciprocal of 7 in base 60 is an infinite repeating fraction. It never ends. It breaks the pattern. It just doesn't fit.
And this mathematical quirk is believed to be the origin of 7's mystical status. It was the first troublemaker number, and because it was different and difficult, it was seen as special, as sacred. And suddenly, you see it everywhere in their culture. 7 gates to the underworld, 7 divine powers, myths that take place over 7 days and 7 nights. This mathematical oddity became a powerful spiritual symbol.
Now, you might be thinking this is all just some interesting ancient history, but the truth is, the legacy of this 5,000-year-old mathematical system is something you interact with every single day.
This number, 60, is literally hardwired into the way we perceive the world.
Ever wonder why there are 60 seconds in a minute? Or 60 minutes in an hour? Why is a circle divided into 360 degrees, which is just 6 times 60? It is no accident. It is a direct inheritance from the Mesopotamian base 60 system. We are still using their math to measure our time and to navigate our world. Think about that. Every time you check your watch or look at a map, you are tapping into a mathematical tradition that was started 5 millennia ago on clay tablets in ancient Sumer. It's pretty incredible. And this brings us to a final thought. The story of Genesis's numbers isn't just about ancient math, it's about a whole different way of thinking. It forces us to ask, when we look back at the ancient world, what else are we reading with our modern eyes that was actually meant to be understood with an ancient heart? What other seemingly literal facts might actually be codes, pointing to a deeper, symbolic truth that we've long since forgotten?
Okay, let's get right into it. When you hear the words ancient Egypt, what comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's this idea of profound, almost secret wisdom. We kind of picture a civilization that had figured out all the big secrets of the universe, and maybe, just maybe, how to live a perfect life. And you know, it makes sense, doesn't it? We look back at these incredible ancient cultures, hoping they left us a kind of instruction manual, a set of rules for how to get things right. So did they? If you do a quick search online, you'll find what looks like a clear answer. You'll see these lists all over the place of something called the 42 Laws of Ma'at. And they're usually presented as this definitive moral code from the time of the pharaohs. But like a lot of things you find online, the real story is, well, it's a whole lot weirder and honestly way more fascinating. It's not really a story about laws at all. This quote here, it's from a conversation between modern-day followers of the ancient Egyptian faith, and it just nails it. These lists that we see everywhere, they're basically a modern invention. The real historical thing they're vaguely inspired by wasn't a rule book for the living. It was more like a script for the dead. Yeah, the actual source for all this is the Book of the Dead. And it wasn't a list of you must do this and you must not do that for everyday life. Instead, it was a set of declarations a soul had to make in the afterlife to prove they were worthy of moving on. Picture this. The soul enters the Hall of Truth and has to stand before 42 divine judges, these assessors of Ma'at. And to every single one of them, the soul had to say, I have not done a specific sin. These are what historians call the negative confessions. And what's so cool is how specific it all was. You didn't just confess to some vague, abstract concept of a god. Nope. You had to look Set Keseku, the bone breaker, in the eye and say, I have not lied. Or you'd face Huraru, the disturber, and have to claim, I have not been hot-tempered. It's like every sin had its own divine specialist on the case. And this, right here, is the absolute key. The famous list that we have comes from the papyrus of a guy named Ani, and it was his personal list. Someone else's list would have been different, you see. It was tailored to their own life, the temptations they faced, the mistakes they might have made. It was never a one-size-fits-all sort of commandments for everybody. It was a personal accounting. So that raises a pretty obvious question, right? If the sins were different for each person, why was the number of judges always 42? Well, it seems like the number itself had some serious juice. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, certain numbers were packed with meaning, like 3, which meant plurality, or 7, which stood for perfection and completeness. So it's a good bet that 42, being a multiple of those sacred numbers, was chosen for its magical and symbolic power in the grand cosmic scheme of things. Okay, so we've got this incredibly detailed belief system, this kind of spiritual software, all carefully written down on papyrus scrolls. But that personal spiritual knowledge isn't the only puzzle the Egyptians left behind. There's this whole other, much more controversial idea that asks, what if they also encoded knowledge not in ink, but in solid stone? You see, the papyrus was a map for one person's soul, a guidebook for their individual judgment. But what about these massive monuments they built to last forever? Some people are convinced that the Great Pyramid wasn't just a tomb at all, but a message of a totally different kind. And this is where we get into a really mind-bending theory, one that comes from the work of researchers like Eckhart Schmitz. The theory basically says the Great Pyramid isn't just an amazing building, it's a hard drive. It's a repository of scientific data, a library built out of stone. And the claims are just staggering. I mean, get this. The theory is that the pyramid's own measurements can be used to figure out fundamental constants about our planet and our solar system. We're talking everything from the mass of the Earth all the way to the speed of light. If that's true, it points to a level of scientific knowledge that is just almost impossible to believe. So, is there anything to this? Is there any actual evidence? Well, let's look at one of the simplest, but maybe one of the most powerful relationships that's supposedly hidden in the pyramid's design. The basic idea here is that the shape of the Great Pyramid is a deliberate physical expression of pi, one of the most fundamental and important numbers in the entire universe. So here's how it supposedly works. If you take the pyramid's height and compare it to the perimeter of its base, that's the distance all the way around the bottom, that ratio is the same as the ratio between a circle's radius and its circumference. They essentially built the formula for pi right into the very structure of the pyramid. It's a really elegant idea, for sure, but why? Why go to all that trouble to build it in exactly that shape? Was there some deeper reason? Well, the theory suggests there was an amazing reason. A pyramid with these exact proportions has a really unique property. The area of its square base is almost perfectly equal to the area of a circle, whose radius is the pyramid's height. This means the pyramid is a physical solution to that legendary ancient math problem, squaring the circle. So let's try to pull these two massive ideas together. On the one hand, you have the well-documented spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians. And on the other, you have these really radical, out-there theories about giant databases of scientific knowledge hidden in their architecture. It's really an amazing contrast when you think about it. The negative confessions were like a personalized cheat sheet for one person's journey into the afterlife. But the pyramid, if this theory is right, was like a physical backup of universal constants, meant to last for all of humanity for all time. It really makes you look at these monuments that we think we know so well in a completely different way. Not just as a tomb for a king, but maybe as a time capsule, left by a civilization that might have known a whole lot more than we ever give them credit for. And that leaves us with this one big question to chew on. When they built these structures, were they just looking up at the heavens in an act of worship? Or were they also measuring them, calculating them, and trying to preserve that knowledge for the future? It's a question written in stone, just waiting for us to find the answer. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, numbers are more than what we learned in math class? What if they're actually a language? A kind of cosmic code that describes not just the universe out there, but also your own life, right here. Well, for thousands of years, Indian philosophy has seen numbers in exactly that way, as powerful vibrations, each with its own profound meaning. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the numbers that literally define your life. Then we'll see how that code is used in everyday decisions. After that, things get really interesting. We're going to uncover a secret cipher hidden in ancient texts. From there, we'll explore how numbers pop up in myths and sacred geometry, and we'll wrap it all up with this huge idea that the entire universe might just be pure vibration. So let's kick things off with something called Vedic numerology, or Anka Shastra. And just to be clear, this isn't some new age trend. We're talking about a system for understanding your personal journey that's over 5,000 years old, pulled directly from ancient scriptures like the Vedas. At its heart, this system asks a really profound question. Could the numbers from your birthday actually be a blueprint for your personality, your challenges, and even your ultimate purpose in life? The idea here is that your life isn't just random chance, it's tuned to a very specific cosmic frequency right from the start. Okay, so the foundation of your personal chart boils down to two key numbers. The first is your psychic number. It's super easy to figure out. You just take the day you were born. So if it's the 25th, you add 2 plus 5 and you get 7. This number is all about your personality, kind of like how you see yourself. Then there's the big one, your destiny number. You get this by adding up your entire birthday, day, month, and year. This number points to your life's purpose and is tied to what's known as your samskaras. Think of those as deep vibrational patterns left over from your past actions, your karmas, that are shaping your path today. Now here's where it gets really fascinating. The system links every single number, from 1 to 9, with a specific planet from Vedic astrology. So number 1 is ruled by the sun, which gives it traits like leadership. Number 8 is ruled by Saturn, which is all about discipline and those big karmic lessons. It's like each number is infused with the unique energy of a celestial body. Okay, so let's see how this isn't just some abstract theory. In India, numerology is a seriously practical tool. It's a living science that's deeply woven into the fabric of everyday life, helping people try to align their choices with these cosmic rhythms. And I mean, people use this for some of the biggest moments in life. Parents will consult a numerologist to pick a baby's name, making sure its vibrational value lines up with the child's destiny. Entrepreneurs look for auspicious dates to launch a new company. Couples will even check their number compatibility before getting married. It's all about creating harmony. As one expert said, the whole point is to save energy by moving with the cosmic flow, not fighting against it. And check this out for a real-world example of how powerful this is believed to be. A numerologist shared a story where a simple change, just adding one letter to a client's name, shifted his name number from an 8, which represents struggle, to a 9, which means fulfillment. And the result? A total transformation in his career. Incredible, right? All right, now prepare to have your mind blown a little bit. We're about to jump from personal destiny into a kind of ancient intellectual spy story to see how scholars in India use numbers to create a secret code, a cipher, hidden right inside the language itself. It's called the Katapayati system, and it is absolutely ingenious. Basically, it's a method where Sanskrit consonants are given specific number values. This lets scholars embed huge amounts of data. We're talking astronomical charts, complex mathematical constants, into poems and verses that were way easier to memorize and pass down through generations. So take a look at this line of Sanskrit. It comes from an ancient text called the Sadratnamala. To you and me, it just looks like a beautiful line of poetry. But hiding in plain sight within these letters is one of the most important numbers in all of science, encoded with a precision that is just staggering. And here it is. This is the big reveal. When you apply the rules of the Katapayati system, assign a number to each consonant and then reverse the sequence, just as the rulebook says, this verse decodes to the value of pi. And not just 3.14, but accurate to an incredible 17 decimal places. It's a mind-bending fusion of poetry, math, and memory. Okay, let's pull the camera back again, because beyond our personal charts and these incredible secret codes, certain numbers show up again and again and again across Indian mythology, religion, and sacred art. They act like these powerful, universal symbols of cosmic order. The number 3 is absolutely foundational. It appears everywhere as a symbol of divine wholeness and balance. You see it most famously in the Trimurti. That's the cosmic trinity of Brahma the creator, Vishnu the Preserver, and Shiva the Destroyer. Together, they represent the three basic forces that govern the entire cycle of existence: birth, life, and death. And you can see this symbolism of three captured perfectly in the sacred symbol Om. The lower curve represents our waking state, the middle curve is the dream state, and that top curve is the state of deep, dreamless sleep. Three distinct parts, all forming one complete symbol of consciousness itself. Next up, we have the number 7. 7 consistently represents the path of spiritual growth, of ascent. It shows up in the Saptarishis, the 7 ancient sages who were said to be the keepers of cosmic knowledge for all of humanity. And that heavenly 7 is mirrored right inside us, in the 7 chakras, the energy centers that run up our spine, mapping our own journey from basic existence to higher consciousness. And then we have 9, the number of completion. And this is where numbers become the literal blueprint for the cosmos in the Sri Yantra. This sacred diagram is made of 9 interlocking triangles. 4 of them point up, representing the masculine or Shiva energy, and 5 of them point down for the feminine or Shakti energy. Their perfect, beautiful union creates a visual map of cosmic unity. Okay, this all brings us to the philosophical peak of our journey, the biggest idea of all. This is where numbers are understood not just as symbols or tools, but as the fundamental vibration of reality itself, like the very sound of creation. And what's so wild is that this ancient Indian idea gets a surprising shout-out in modern times. The brilliant inventor Nikola Tesla was obsessed with the numbers 3, 6, and 9. He called them divine numbers and truly believed they held the key to understanding the energy of the universe. And this is so crucial. Even the concept of zero, which was India's great gift to mathematics, was born from philosophy. It wasn't just an empty placeholder. It was shunya. It didn't represent nothingness. It represented the void of infinite potential, the unmanifest source from which the number 1 could emerge, and from that single 1, all of creation could follow. So, after all this, after exploring this cosmic code, we're left with one final, profound question. Did we humans invent numbers to try and make sense of the world around us? Or is the universe itself actually written in the language of numbers, and we're all just slowly learning how to read it?
So let's talk about feng shui. Now, you might think it's just about, moving your plants around for better luck, but it turns out there's this incredible 6,000-year-old story here. We're talking ancient astronomy, billion-dollar corporations, and, believe it or not, the stock market. All right, let's get into it.
Here's what we've got lined up. We're going to start with how we see feng shui today, and then we're going to jump way back in time to its cosmic origins. After that, we'll break down the core principles, see how they're used in the modern world, and uncover this wild link to corporate finance. And finally, we'll tackle the big one. Is this a profound system of thought or just pseudoscience?
So let's start with that question you're probably thinking. Is it really just about rearranging your furniture to get better vibes and maybe a little more wealth? That's the popular idea, right? Especially in the West. But that simple concept, it's just the very, very tip of a massive ancient iceberg. The real story is so much more complex and honestly, way more interesting.
Yeah, so our journey really starts with this modern view. In a lot of Western countries, feng shui have been kind of boiled down to the chic, spiritual interior design. You've got consultants and architects charging fortunes to optimize spaces for success. But this whole commercialized trend, it's a universal way from where it all started.
I mean, just look at the name itself. Feng shui literally means wind, water, and that's the key. Historically, the idea was that the landscape, the wind and the water, directs the flow of a universal cosmic current called qi. So the goal wasn't just about making your living room feel better, it was about aligning entire cities and entire lives with this powerful, invisible flow of energy.
So let's dig into that incredible history. I mean, this is not some new age fad that popped up in the 70s. We're talking about a practice that has roots stretching back at least 6,000 years. It's deeply woven into the fabric of Chinese astronomy, cosmology, and architecture.
And you can literally see its evolution through time. It all started with pure astronomy, way back around 4000 BC, with people just aligning their homes with stars to catch more sunlight. Then, 1,000 years later, we start seeing these complex cosmic diagrams on jade artifacts. Soon you get specialized tools like astrolabes. And then, the big one. Once the magnetic compass was invented in China, it was immediately snapped up for feng shui, becoming that iconic tool we see today.
And this is where it gets really cool, this blend of myth and pure mathematics. The legend goes that this perfect magic square, the Lo Shu, was found on the shell of a divine turtle. See, every single row, column, and diagonal adds up to 15. But this wasn't just a party trick. It became a foundational blueprint, a model of cosmic order, used to design everything from sacred temples to entire capital cities.
So, how does this all actually work? What are these invisible forces that feng shui masters claim to be manipulating? Okay, let's pop the hood and look at the engine room of the whole practice, the core concepts that have guided it for thousands of years.
The absolute center of everything is qi. Pronounced qi, it's the vital life force, the cosmic breath that flows through all things. You can think of it like a river of energy that can be either positive or negative. The entire goal of feng shui, whether you're placing a tomb or building a skyscraper, is to tap into the good qi and protect yourself from the bad stuff. And that energy has two sides to it, which you've definitely heard of, yin and yang. But this isn't a simple good versus evil thing. Yin is the receptive, quiet force, and yang is the active, exerting force. They're totally inseparable, always changing into one another. So the goal isn't for one to win, it's to find that perfect, dynamic, harmonious balance between them. And then, layered right on top of that, you have the 5 elements. But again, it's way more complex than it sounds. We're not just talking about physical wood or water. These are seen as 5 fundamental forces, the different ways that qi transforms. They interact in this constant cycle of creation and destruction, like water helps wood grow, but fire burns wood up. Getting those forces in balance is absolutely essential for good feng shui.
Okay, so we've got qi, yin, and yang, the 5 elements, a lot of abstract stuff. So how does this ancient system actually apply to the real world? Let's take a look at how these rules have shaped everything from tiny ancient villages to today's massive corporate headquarters.
You know, traditionally, feng shui was incredibly practical. It was used to do things like design villages on higher ground so they wouldn't flood, or manage forests and streams so people wouldn't overuse them. It was even used to settle community arguments, because its rules were seen as cosmic and impartial, a framework for living in harmony with nature and each other.
And this practicality is still a huge deal for some of the biggest businesses today. I mean, get this, Hong Kong Disneyland. While it was being built, the company brought in feng shui masters, and based on their advice, they literally moved the main entrance by 12 degrees, all to make sure the energy flow was right for good fortune. We're not talking about a small change, that's a major architectural decision for a multi-billion-dollar project. Which brings us to the most surprising part of this whole story. We're about to pivot from the flow of cosmic energy to the flow of cold, hard cash. Because as it turns out, these ancient beliefs have a real, measurable, and sometimes pretty manipulative impact on the modern stock market.
It all comes down to numerology. In Chinese culture, some numbers are considered really lucky or unlucky, basically depending on what they sound like. The number 8, for example, sounds a lot like the word for prosper, so it's super lucky. 6 means smooth. But the number 4, it sounds almost identical to the word for death, and that makes it deeply, deeply unlucky. This isn't just a minor preference, it's a powerful cultural belief. So, a few researchers recently decided to look into this. They already knew that these superstitions affect how regular people invest their money, but they asked a new question. Are companies themselves actively using this? Are they deliberately tweaking their financial reports to play on these superstitions?
And the answer appears to be a big ol' yes. The study looked at thousands of corporate financial reports, specifically the earnings per share number, and they found that about 20%, a full 1 in 5 public companies, were reporting earnings that just so happened to end in the lucky numbers 6 or 8. That's way, way too many for it to be a random coincidence.
But when they dug deeper, it got even weirder. They found that these lucky number companies were much more likely to be, shall we say, managing their earnings, fudging the books a little. And guess what? It worked. The next year, they raised a lot more money from investors. But here's the kicker. They didn't use that cash to invest back in the company. So where did all that money go?
And here's the cynical punchline. The study concluded that the managers were using these lucky numbers to bait superstitious investors. And then the big, controlling shareholders were tunneling those funds, siphoning the money right out of the company for their own private benefit. It's a totally modern corporate scam hiding behind an ancient belief. Which leads us straight into the final and maybe the most heated part of this whole discussion. Because for all its deep history and cultural power, feng shui has always been surrounded by some serious skepticism and controversy. So let's look at the case against it. And this skepticism is nothing new. Check out this quote from Matteo Ricci. He was a Jesuit missionary back in the 1600s, one of the first Westerners to really document feng shui. He was just baffled by it, calling it an absurd superstition. He couldn't wrap his head around why anyone would believe their entire life depended on what he called such trifles, like which way a door was facing.
And the modern critiques are just as sharp. Scientists pretty much universally label it a pseudoscience because its claims about energy and qi can't be tested or proven false. Even in China, it was banned during the Cultural Revolution as a feudalistic superstition. And to really drive the point home, the TV show Bullshit once brought in 5 different feng shui experts to analyze the same house, and they got 5 completely different, totally contradictory recommendations.
So where does that leave us? What is feng shui? Is it an ancient form of ecological wisdom, a rich cultural tradition that brings meaning and harmony? Or is it a profitable pseudoscience that's all too easy to exploit? Its incredible 6,000-year survival really makes you wonder, what does its endurance tell us about our deep, fundamental need as humans to find some kind of order in a world that so often feels completely chaotic?
Have you ever just looked up at the night sky and felt, well, a kind of order to it all, a harmony? For thousands of years, people actually had a name for that feeling, the music of the spheres. It's this ancient poetic idea that the universe itself is one giant symphony, all governed by musical laws. So let's dive into this beautiful and, you'll be surprised, incredibly influential concept. And this quote, wow. This is from the ancient Greek philosopher Pythagoras, and it just gets right to the heart of the whole thing. It's this perfect bridge between two worlds we usually keep separate, right? You've got the cold, hard logic of math on one side and the deep, emotional power of music on the other. So that's really the big question we're asking today. What if the planets, in their totally silent dance across the heavens, are actually playing a song? A song we can't hear with our ears, but one we could maybe understand through the universal language of numbers. All right, to get this, our story has to start way back, over 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece, with a guy who was, let's see, part mathematician, part mystic, and maybe even a little bit of a cult leader, the one and only Pythagoras of Samos. You see, Pythagoras basically started a revolution in thought. Before him, math was, well, it was just a practical tool, for figuring out your wages or dividing up a plot of land. But Pythagoras, he saw it completely differently. He argued that numbers weren't just for counting things, they were the actual substance of reality itself, the key to unlocking the entire cosmos. So the legend goes that his great aha moment came in a blacksmith shop. He heard hammers of different weights hitting an anvil, and he noticed something. Some combinations of sounds were really pleasing, what we'd call consonant, while others were just jarring. He realized the good sounds weren't random. They were all governed by the mathematical relationship between the weights of the hammers. He raced back to his lab, or, whatever they had back then, and tested this with vibrating strings. And there it was, his core discovery. Harmonious musical intervals, the actual building blocks of all music, they all correspond to these simple whole number ratios. An octave is a clean 2-to-1 ratio, a perfect fifth, 3-to-2. All of a sudden, music wasn't just art anymore. It was a science. It was a tangible expression of mathematical order. So you can see where this is going, right? If these simple little numbers could explain the harmony of a vibrating string, Pythagoras thought, why not the harmony of the entire universe? This was the epic leap, from strings to the stars. Now, the key to making this cosmic leap was a sacred symbol they had called the tetractys. It's this cool little triangle made of 10 dots, and it represents the first 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. These weren't just any numbers. They were the exact numbers that created musical harmony. For the Pythagoreans, this was it. This was the fount and root of all of creation. But the tetractys was about so much more than just music. For them, it was literally a blueprint for reality itself. Think about it. 1 point, well, that's just a single location in space, 0 dimensions. 2 points, you can draw a line, 1 dimension. 3 points, you can make a flat plane, a triangle, 2 dimensions. And 4 points define a 3-dimensional solid. These 4 numbers literally built space as we know it. From here, the next jump was kind of obvious for them. The planets, moving in their orbits, must also be governed by these perfect ratios. In their model of the universe, the Earth and the planets didn't orbit the sun, but a central fire, and their distances were all arranged to create a perfect celestial harmony. And get this, they were so committed to the perfection of the number 10 that when they counted only 9 heavenly bodies, they just invented a 10th one, a counter-Earth, they called it, forever hidden on the other side of the fire, just to make the math work out.
Okay, so for almost 2,000 years, this idea of a perfect, simple cosmic music pretty much reigned supreme. Then, along comes the 17th century astronomer Johannes Kepler. He's armed with Copernicus's new sun-centered model of the universe, but he doesn't just toss the old idea in the trash. No, he gives it a massive and, frankly, much-needed reboot.
So this is the crucial point, how Kepler totally reimagined the whole symphony. The old harmony was simple, like a single perfect melody based on how far the planets were. But Kepler's new harmony? It was based on planetary speeds. As planets moved in their elliptical orbits, their speeds would change, creating this complex, multi-voiced music like a whole choir singing different parts. And here's the most important bit. It wasn't always perfectly harmonious. It had tension, it had dissonance, just like real, interesting music. He actually worked it out. He figured each planet had its own vocal range. So Mercury, with its really elliptical orbit, swoops from a super high note to a low note, a huge range. Venus, on the other hand, with its almost perfectly circular orbit, pretty much just hums a single constant tone. And together, they formed this 6-part celestial choir. Saturn and Jupiter were the bass, Mars was the tenor, Earth and Venus the altos, and tiny little Mercury was the soprano. Okay, but this is where the story takes a turn you probably didn't see coming. For Kepler, this cosmic harmony wasn't just about stars and planets. He believed it was a blueprint for how we should live down here on Earth. It was a model for politics. See, at the time, other political thinkers, like this guy Jean Bodin, were using the idea of harmony to justify absolute monarchy. Their argument was, hey, just like there's one perfect mathematical order, there must be one perfect political order, with an all-powerful king at the top. But Kepler saw it differently. His cosmic harmony was complex. It was diverse. It wasn't about a single, rigid formula. It was a flexible principle. It taught that unity could come from diversity, allowing for different systems and perspectives to all work together for the public good. And you have to remember, this wasn't just some abstract academic debate for him. Kepler was living through the 30 Years' War, this absolutely brutal conflict that was tearing Europe apart over religion. So his vision of a harmony that could embrace dissonance and difference, it was a desperate plea for tolerance, a cosmic argument for peace in a world that was literally tearing itself apart. So we have this absolutely beautiful idea, evolving over 2,000 years, from strings to stars to society. But we've got to ask the obvious question, don't we? Is there actually a symphony playing out there among the stars? Well, the short answer is no. And the reason why reveals this tiny but ultimately fatal flaw in the perfect mathematical world of the ancient Greeks. It all comes down to this number. This represents something called the Pythagorean comma. It's this tiny little discrepancy that shows up when you try to build a musical scale using only that perfect 3-to-2 ratio of a fifth. Here's the idea. If you stack 12 of those perfect fifths on top of each other, you should, in theory, land exactly back where you started, just 7 octaves higher. But you don't. You overshoot by this teeny tiny amount, the Pythagorean comma. And what that means is that the perfect circle of fifths isn't a circle at all. It's a spiral. The system never actually closes on itself. That beautiful, perfect repeating harmony that Pythagoras imagined, it had a tiny mathematical crack in it from the very beginning. So okay, the literal idea of planets singing songs, yeah, that's wrong. But, and this is a huge but, its true legacy is way more profound. This was really the first time anyone proposed that the universe is, at its core, mathematical. And it was the first time math was used not just to describe what we can see, but to predict things we can't see, like that imaginary counter-Earth. And this way of thinking, well, it changed everything. You can draw a straight line from this Pythagorean impulse to the greatest triumphs of modern physics. When James Clerk Maxwell's equations predicted radio waves, when Paul Dirac's math predicted the existence of antimatter, when Einstein's math predicted gravitational waves, they were all, in a way, listening for the music of the spheres. They were using mathematics to reveal a hidden cosmic order. So in the end, the music of the spheres isn't a sound we can hear, but it became a new way of seeing the universe. It's the powerful belief that beneath all the chaos we see, there is a deep, mathematical, and beautiful order just waiting for us to discover it. Which of course leaves us with the ultimate question. What unheard music, What hidden harmonies are we on the verge of discovering next? All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about gematria. It's this ancient practice where letters have numerical values. Now, for hundreds of years, it was this kind of niche thing for biblical scholars. But today, it's found a whole new and much more intense life online, and it's fueling some of the internet's wildest conspiracy theories. And that brings us to the central and pretty provocative question we found in our research. Could a secret code hidden in ancient texts actually be used to script reality? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a movie, but for a growing online community, this isn't fiction. It's a daily truth. So what exactly is gematria? Well, the easiest way to think about it is like a cryptogram puzzle. It's a system where every single letter has a number assigned to it. That means you can take any word, any phrase, add up the letter values, and get a total. The whole idea is that words with the same number share some kind of hidden connection or meaning. But before we dive headfirst into the wild world of modern theories, we've got to back up a little. We have to understand where this all came from. Because for centuries, gematria wasn't a conspiracy tool. It was a respected, though pretty specialized, literary art used to add these deep layers of meaning to sacred texts. And this was no fringe idea, not at all. The Masoretes, these were the scribes who painstakingly preserved the Hebrew Bible. They were practically obsessed with numbers. They counted everything, every letter, every word, to make sure not a single thing was changed. They even marked the exact mathematical center of entire books. It just goes to show you, numbers were woven into the very fabric of Scripture right from the beginning. And this is a really key distinction. As one Reddit user pointed out, pushing back against the modern stuff, the original practice wasn't about predicting the future. It was a formal system of rhetoric mathematics. Basically a fancy way to add context and connect different ideas in the Bible using numerical patterns. Okay, so let's make this real. Here's a simplified look at how it works in Hebrew. You can see each letter from Aleph to Tav has its own number. It creates this whole other way of reading a text, you know? You're not just looking at the words, you're looking for a mathematical layer of meaning just beneath the surface. A perfect example of this in action is the number 14. In Hebrew, the name David, which is spelled with consonants that look like DVD, adds up to 14. So when you get to the New Testament and the Gospel of Matthew lays out the family tree of Jesus in 3 sets of, you guessed it, 14 generations, that's not random. It's a deliberate numerical signal to the reader, basically shouting, hey, remember King David? This is important. And it wasn't just about adding up names. Certain numbers carried huge symbolic weight all on their own. Take the number 7. It wasn't just the number that comes after 6. It stood for big concepts like fullness, completeness, or divine perfection. So seeing the number 7 in a text was a clue that you were dealing with a theme of something being whole or divinely complete. It was a language of symbols, not just simple math. Okay. Now, let's shift gears, because we're about to see how this ancient literary practice has morphed into something else entirely. We are leaving the world of ancient texts and entering a modern, high-stakes theory of global control. And this quote right here from a Reddit thread really gets to the heart of the modern belief. In this view, gematria isn't a tool for understanding old books. No, it's an active occult system that a shadowy they is using to literally script major world events before they happen. And the claims get dark fast. This user alleges that gematria is used for ritualistic murders. The example they give is Paul Gray from the band Slipknot. He died at 38 years old, and according to their calculation, the numerical value of his full name is also 38. For believers, that's no coincidence. It's a signature. The connections start to feel like these intricate riddles. Take the death of the musician Prince. He died on Queen Elizabeth's birthday. The link here is Prince, Queen, and the color purple, which is tied to both royalty and, of course, to Prince himself. It's all about finding these symbolic, almost poetic connections hidden in the news. And this theory gets applied to the biggest events you can imagine. Look at these claims about 9/11. Flight 77 hits a 77-foot-tall pentagon on the 77th meridian. Then, using a specific gematria cipher, the phrases September 11th and World Trade Center both supposedly equals 77. To the people who believe this is the hidden blueprint of a meticulously planned event. And that leads to this really defiant conclusion. For believers, if you don't see these patterns, you're the one who's not seeing clearly. They see gematria as the literal code to the matrix, a system of control that's all around us, forcing everyone to just, quote, keep bending to the script. But, of course, there's a whole other side of this. Is this really a hidden code that runs the world, or is it just a trick of the human mind? Let's take a look at the skepticism. And this is where the two worldviews just completely collide. On one side, you have this claim of a perfect numerical pattern for 9/11, and on the other, you have a skeptic firing back, saying, dude, I could flip these numbers around 10 different times and come up with the same result. They're saying it's just cherry-picking data to fit a theory.
This point is pretty hilariously made by a writer named Mike Leake. He actually tried to prove that he was the Antichrist using gematria. He crunched the numbers on his own name and got 648, which is so close to the infamous 666, but, 18 short. His point is a powerful one. If you're determined to find a pattern, you can almost always find one that's close enough.
And this really gets at a fundamental psychological principle: confirmation bias. It's our brain's natural tendency to look for and remember information that confirms what we already believe. You see the hits, the times the numbers line up perfectly, and you completely ignore the countless times they don't mean anything at all. So these skeptical voices all tend to hit on a few key points. They argue the connections are just pure coincidence. Some religious critics even say it's a distraction from real faith. And maybe most importantly, they point out that there isn't just one gematria. There are tons of different ciphers and systems, which lets you basically shop around until you find a calculation that gives you the answer you wanted from the start. So, where does all this leave us? We have two completely separate worlds using the exact same ancient system. One is trying to find symbolic depth in scripture, and the other is trying to decode a global conspiracy. What's the common thread here? What's the impulse driving both? I mean, this is really the fundamental question, isn't it? Is gematria just a forgotten literary tool, a formal system of ancient rhetoric? Or have a handful of internet sleuths actually stumbled onto the code to the matrix, the language being used to write our reality? Well, maybe, in the end, both the ancient scribe and the modern redditor are tapping into the same deep-seated human need. That desire to find patterns in the noise, to find order in the chaos, and to believe that there's a hidden layer of meaning just waiting to be found in a world that can often feel pretty confusing. Which leaves us with one last question to think about. Are these hidden connections real? Is there a secret language of numbers shaping our world? Or are our brains just the ultimate pattern-finding machines, so good at their job that sometimes they find patterns even where there aren't any? The answer, it seems, depends entirely on what you're looking for.